Welcome to Hustle and Flow with Heather Hubbard, episode number 76. Hi, I'm Heather Hubbard, and I was a litigator, partner, and practice group leader at an AmLaw 200 firm. I know what it takes to rise to the top. I also know all too well the toll it can take on your personal life. So how do you shine bright without burning out? How do you embrace your ambition without selling your soul? You're listening to the Hustle and Flow podcast. Welcome back. I am your host, Heather Hubbard. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you had a fabulous 4th of July. So I have to tell you, I am recording this the day after, and my husband actually worked the 4th of July, so I stayed home, which I always work from home, but I kind of worked and I kind of took the day off, and it was like the quietest day of the year. There's so much construction that's going on around me in my neighborhood, and no one was working on any houses. No one was mowing their yard. I literally thought I was at a resort somewhere. So it was fabulous. And perhaps you actually were out watching fireworks or with your family and friends. Whatever you did, I hope you had a fabulous 4th of July. Okay, so we are back for 3 more episodes, and then I am taking a week off at the end of July to go on vacation. So I'm super excited about that, but we've got 3 more. We're on this lighter summer schedule. But before we jump in today's topic, I did want to share with you that I'm going to be doing a business development masterclass. So this is a live webinar, and I'm offering 2 in case you can't attend one. I will not be doing a replay on these. So you got to attend live, but it's going to be training. So it's like the podcast, but I'll actually be helping you work through some things. And again, it's live, so you can ask questions. So I'm super excited about that. We're going to do these on Thursday, July 12th at 3 p.m. Central, and on Tuesday, July 17th, at 10 a.m. Central. So if you want to register, it's absolutely free, but you do have to sign up. If you want to register for the Business Development Masterclass, all you have to do is go to heatherjoyhubbard.com/business development. heatherjoyhubbard.com/business development. And we will include that link in the show notes as well. Okay, with that invite out of the way, let's talk about fixed fees. I have to be honest, I have no idea if I can actually get through the content today in 30 minutes because I have so much to say about this topic. And so maybe we can get it done in 30 minutes. If not, what we will do is we will have a second part in August. So just kind of being upfront on this one. By the end of this episode, I'll be able to tell you whether or not we got through it. But right now, as I'm starting recording, I don't know. So let's just jump into the content and talk about it. This actually came up in my annual mastermind. So one of my clients, she was asking the question if others in the group had feedback on how they do their fixed fee prices. She was saying that when she sets these amounts, it seems like they always go way over in the time it took to complete something. And so then it feels like they did a really poor job of coming up with a fixed fee to begin with. And then I have a few other small firm retainer clients that are also really into trying fixed fees right now. And they too are struggling with, how do I know if I'm even pricing this correctly? Because sometimes it feels like we give so much more than we would if we were just doing it hourly. So that's what I want to talk about. It keeps coming up. And it was funny because when I was providing my response in the Facebook group, I said, you can't compare it to the hourly rate, but a conversation was had around it. We'll talk about that in today's podcast episode. But where I really want to start, I don't really want to start with, here's your formula for how you price your fixed fees. What I want to talk about first and foremost is how not to look at it, how not to go about it, because that's where I think attorneys actually make the biggest mistake. It's not the fact that they've got their formula wrong. It's because they're looking at it from the completely wrong perspective. And given the way that law firms work, given the way that we've been trained, it's really, really hard to look at this in a different way. You know, we often talk about that lawyer hat from a mindset perspective and how we can really get in our heads and we can really think that we're special and people don't understand us. And this is just the way the law works. This is going to be a similar concept. And part of it is mindset. And part of it is just our culture, our industry norms. And so it's going to require you to stretch a little bit. So I encourage you today, as we're talking through this, to be curious, to be really, really curious, because if you have a fixed mindset, you're going to miss some stuff. And the idea is to be like, okay, I'm going to be open and curious. And even if I think I don't agree with her to begin with, I'm going to still listen to see if there's any truth to it, to see if there's anything that I could maybe use and apply in my own situation. Okay, so just suspend your judgment for our time together if you can. Okay, so let's talk about what not to do when you are considering how to come up with a fixed fee. Okay, so I already alluded to this, but first and foremost, never, ever, ever, ever compare it to the billable hour. I just realized I sounded a bit like Taylor Swift there. I do like that song. Here's the thing. If you compare it to the billable hour, someone always wins and someone always loses. It is a zero-sum game. So what's happening in this situation is you're saying, okay, I'm going to create a budget. How many hours do I think it's going to take for me to complete this project? Or how many hours is it going to take my associate? And then, you know, I apply their billable rate to how many hours I think it's going to take. And then I have that number. And then I'm going to create a fixed fee around that. I may choose that number. I may go a little bit lower. I may go a little bit higher. But in essence, all I have done is I've created an estimate and then I'm guaranteeing that estimate. So then the work comes in and you either track your time, you track your associate's time, and then at the end of the project, you say, okay, if we were billing hourly with the amount of time that it took at the rate, what would the bill be? And so when you then say, oh, well, I would have made so much more if I had done it on the billable hour, you then say, oh, well, then we did a bad fixed fee price. Or if it comes in lower, you do a happy dance and you say, yay, not only did we make what we would have made on the billable hour, but we made even more. And I think that's the desire by most attorneys when they're interested in this fixed fee concept is, I'm going to make more money than I could have otherwise. Or you may take the point of view that it all averages out in the end, and you may not even be interested in it, but the client's the one that's really interested in it, and you might lose on some and you might win on some, but at the end of the day, it averages out. But again, the entire process is really just guaranteeing an estimate of what the billable hour would have been. And that's where everything goes wrong. But because that's where you start, it's a recipe for disaster. You're never going to win at this game. If your clients are doing the same thing, right? If your clients are coming to you and saying, well, if they want a bill that still shows the hourly rates and how much time it took, then they too might be coming back to you, especially if they're lawyers, right? If they're in-house, right? So if you were given the option of here's what it would be billable, hourly, and here's what it would be flat fee, that's the same situation. If they're comparing it, then they too are always feeling like they're winning or they're losing. And I hope you can see how that does not create a good relationship. It just doesn't. Someone feels like they're always getting the short end of the stick every single time. And that's not really what you want, which granted, that can happen too just with the billable hour. Clients get these bills and they're like, what in the world? And they either think you spent too much time on it, or they had initially asked what they thought, it would cost, and you gave them an estimate, and then the bill is way more than the estimate. It can create a lot of relationship issues. So just keep that in mind, that if you are doing your fixed fee around the billable hour, there's still that stress in the relationship, and it doesn't actually change anything. It defeats the entire purpose of trying to have a fixed fee, in my opinion. Okay. With that said, you might want to consider the labor cost. And this came up in the mastermind because I was like, please don't compare it to the hourly bill, because you're always going to win and you're always going to lose. And this attorney said, and she has independent contractors, she said, yes, but I do want to consider the labor cost. And I 100% agree and endorse that concept. So this gets a little complicated, and it's why most big law firms now have someone on staff dedicated just to pricing. Okay. Because if you really want to get granular, you can. If you don't have a pricing expert on your law firm team, if you're a solo, small firm, you don't have to do all of that to get this right. And depending on whether or not the pricing expert at your large law firm is having to cater to the way that the administration looks at fixed fees, you too may just want to do this on your own. That's a whole different discussion around politics and firms, but it may or may not be the right way to do it for you. Okay, so if you have direct labor costs, what that means is if you are paying an independent contractor an hourly rate to do the work that you are, doing on a fixed fee or a flat fee, then that absolutely is a cost that you should be considering. But presumably, the cost, like the expense to pay that attorney, is going to be less than their billable hourly rate, right? Now, if it's not someone who you are truly paying by the hour, if instead it is like an associate that has a salary, that calculation gets a little bit more complicated, and I encourage you just not to do it, okay? To me, it really only matters if you have a direct hourly rate related to the work that's being produced. And again, this is the hourly rate you pay the attorney, not the billable hourly rate of the attorney. Okay, the other piece to this, you can also consider overhead. So that would be the same concept as like someone with a salary, or your own, right? Your own salary. You could consider that, right? Like that could be a cost. I think that gets a little complicated, and I don't think it's necessary. So we're going to skip over that. That is a very complicated conversation. And if it's something that you guys want, I'm actually happy to bring on a big law pricing expert to share with you how they do those calculations. But for today, we're going to put that aside. Okay. So with that in mind, let's talk about how you do go about creating a fixed fee. Okay. Well, first and foremost, you want to consider the value. And this can be a hard concept because as attorneys, the only thing we really know to do when it comes to creating value or establishing value is to say, well, here's my billable hourly rate. Like that's the value. I don't really know the value outside of that. And then the other complication is I don't really know how a client values services. I suspect they simply know what hourly rates are. So if they're shopping around for services, that's what they're going by. Like, how do you determine value otherwise? And so this is a business concept. It's also, a financial concept. It is not a legal concept. And so it can be difficult for attorneys. We were not taught this. That's why when I created this company, I started by charging hourly rates. And when I put packages together, coaching packages or anything else, I would say, okay, how many hours is it going to take and what is my hourly rate? I was doing the same thing. Like, I am not trying to tell you that like I had this figured out beforehand, because I was acting like a lawyer when I started pricing things in this business. Luckily, I hired business coaches and joined business masterminds to learn how to run a business. And I learned from that I was doing it all wrong. My coaches were like, what are you doing? And I'm like, this is how it's done. And they're like, no, it's not. So you probably know this, I don't have an hourly rate. So when people tell me, hey, can we just jump on the phone? Can I just pay you for an hour of your time? Or I know you don't do individual coaching, but can we just jump on the phone and then you just send me a bill? Or when I send packages and attorneys want to know, well, how much am I being charged for each? What's the hourly rate? And I say, I don't have an hourly rate. And I can't even offer you those services and send you a bill because I have no idea what to charge you. I don't have an hourly rate. And that kind of blows some people's minds, because they're like, well, you have to have something that you're working off of when, you're putting together your pricing. And I do, but it has nothing to do with an hourly rate. Instead, what my coaches taught me, and it was a learning process, it was a lot of hit or miss. And I hope that that's what you learn from all of this is, this is for everything, whether it's fixed fees, business development, practice management. It's all about coming up with a strategy, testing it out and trying it, and then maintaining it or pivoting if it's not working. Like, we can't be afraid of failure. We can't be afraid of learning from mistakes. Okay? So with that said, this is a bit mushy, but you start with what is the value? And what I've learned in the way I try to approach it is, what is the value that the client's going to get from this? And so I have to stop initially thinking about it in terms of financial value. And instead, I have to just look at it from a much bigger picture. So I ask myself questions like, well, what's the benefit? What will be the end result? Is this going to in some way improve, their stress levels, reduce them? And if so, what does that look like? What does that mean? What is the result? Does it mean that they sleep better at night? Does it mean that they don't have like debilitating anxiety all the time? Does it mean they simply enjoy their practice of law better? Does it mean that when they're at home, they can be more present? Like, what does that look like? What are the benefits that they're getting? If it's in terms of business development, again, what might that look like? If they can get a better strategy, if they can start executing in a way that brings them results, what do those results look like? And those results might be financial. So what do they stand to gain? How much more money can they bring in? Same concept if you're working on certain practice management issues. Like, if you can help them get systems in place, how much money can they save by being more efficient? And how much time can they save? How much energy can they save? And that is not a dollar amount, right? Like, that's not financial. That goes back to what is the result? What is the benefit? And so from there, I get all of that written down. Like, I really try to put myself in the shoes of the client, of the firm, of the business, and say, what are they going to get out of this? And then after I've got all of that written down, I say, well, what's that worth? What's that worth? And here's the thing, that's different for each person. It's different for each company. But I can't really look at, if I'm going to put together packages, where I don't want to have to recreate the wheel each time, I can't look at each specific person each and every time. I do kind of have to consider my ideal client, the person I want to work with the most, not necessarily the average client, but my ideal client. And I say, well, what do I think it would be worth to them? And I look at it both in terms of the positive results, and I also look in terms of what am I saving for them, right? Because it could be cutting expenses or not having to deal with something that they were dealing with before, right? So it's both giving them positive results and reducing the negative results they already have, right? And so you just think about it in terms of, okay, so if you could sleep better at night, every night, like if you could get this amount of sleep and you didn't wake up in the middle of the night anymore, like what is that worth to you? And it may be worth a lot, like a whole lot more than you would ever even charge. But when you start talking about value, that's how you got to think about it. What is it worth? And you might be thinking, well, I mean, if I work with big companies, like that's weird. I'm not going to think about sleeping better at night. Well, don't forget that companies are indeed a lot of different people, right? The company doesn't run without the people. So the general counsel, the CEO, they too want to sleep at night. They too want to be present with their families. And if the issue that you're going to be handling is keeping them up at night, if it's keeping the board up at night, if the shareholders are upset about it, yeah, that actually can be a consideration as to worth. So that's really how you want to start thinking through that. So you just want to brainstorm all the different ways in which your service is going to benefit them. And this is going to require you to not be so dang logical, because you're going to want to sit down and talk about, oh, well, it will minimize their legal risk. Okay, that means nothing. Unless you can put like, okay, their lawsuits would be, I'm making something up, 50,000, and the work that I do can make their lawsuits more like 10,000. Okay, fine. You could put a financial number on that. But otherwise, don't think of it in those terms. Think about, okay, well, if I could help them minimize their legal risk, what does that look like for the company? What does that look like for the individuals impacted by that in the company, right? So don't just go surface level on this. I know that's going to be your inclination. I want you to dig really, really deep and look at it from an emotional aspect. Look at it from a financial aspect. Look at it from a physical and mental aspect. Really, really try to get to the core of how it will impact someone. Don't be using your legal jargon, okay? You also want to consider, like, what are the results? What are the benefits, both immediately and long term? Now, you may be thinking, well, I'm doing this and I'm now realizing that the benefit is amazing, but there's no way that a client's ever going to pay me that price. So that really then becomes part of the way you package it, the way you market it, and the way that you sell it. So we're not going to get into that in this episode, but that really is how you approach it. And it's how I approach it myself. And like I said, there will be times I do that analysis, but I then still have to rely upon my gut, right? So if I do that analysis and I say, okay, here's the number, and I look to other markets and I say, and that's not a bad number, but I look to my market and say, but my customers aren't used to this market and they're not used to spending in this way. In that instance, I lower the amount. I lower the amount to where I think it's a stretch, but it's still within the range of a reason. And the way I know if that's working or not is based upon whether or not people are buying. And I know that once I've hit my maximum capacity, then it's time to increase the prices. So, for those of you that have been following me for a while and you see how my prices increase, part of that is because I've been underpricing for a really long time, but I have to let the market build up to where the value really is. And I do have coaches that it drives them crazy that I'm not pricing things where the value really is. But here's the thing. If I know my market's not going to be there, if they need educating and coaching around it, then I can have it priced, at the right value all day long. But if no one's buying, then that doesn't really, pay the bills or accomplish anything. So just keep in mind that this is really fluid. You're starting with what's the value, but then you're looking at, does my client really understand that? Now, I can coach, I can educate, but in this moment, does this look out of the norm for what they're used to paying? Depending on what you're doing, it could be that, when clients start pricing this out, especially if they're individuals looking for certain things, unless they're calling a bunch of attorneys, they don't really know. They don't really know at all. That actually gives you more flexibility. Otherwise, what they probably know is either an hourly rate or someone else's fixed fee. But again, part of that goes around the sales conversation. That is not a pricing issue. That is a marketing sales conversion issue. Also, if you're at a bigger firm, there could be some requirement to educate your in-house counsel, but companies pay flat fees for things all the time. And so in-house counsel's perfectly familiar with those contracts. And if you can start guiding the conversation so that they see that they're similar, that can change the conversation. But again, that is really a marketing and sales conversation. That's not the pricing situation. Okay. So you figure out the benefit, you figure out the value, and then you kind of just trust your gut, assuming that you know your ideal client really well about what they would be willing to pay. And if you're struggling with this concept at all, what I want you to do is to start looking at how companies price from a fixed fee perspective, even though they're not calling it a fixed fee. Okay, so if you're at a small firm, you're definitely familiar with this. If you're at a big firm, you may not if you're not in management. But you could totally go have a conversation with someone that is in management to help you better understand. Or just think about it in your personal life. Okay, so for example, when you hire a web designer, when you hire someone to do your website, do they tell you, here's what it's going to cost per hour? And when you say, well, what's the estimate? Like, how many hours do you think it's going to take? Do they then say, well, there's really no way to know what we're going to get into. And it could be that your systems are this way. And it could be that you don't have the right hosting. And it could be you're a really high maintenance client. No. Well, maybe that's the kind of web designer you talk to. But if so, I encourage you to find a new one. No. They tell you, here's the, like they want to talk to you, right? Like they might have different packages, but they're going to ask you what you're trying to accomplish. Is it from scratch? Are you totally redoing it? Are you just redoing certain pages? And then they're going to give you a flat fee. And they don't call it a flat fee. They just say, okay, here's what it's going to cost and here are the pricing terms. What they also do though, is they have a scope. They have a scope of work, and that scope of work tells you what's going to be done. And it also tells you what's going to happen if you go outside of that scope. Sometimes that then does trigger an hourly requirement, but not always. It's simply outside the scope, and you would have to enter into a new contract if you then wanted that done. Another example, hiring photographers, right? So if someone's coming in to do a whole big firm, they don't say, oh, well, here's my hourly charge. No, like from the shooting to the editing, it's all the same. Here's the thing. They don't know how long it's going to take to edit, because depending on the lighting, depending on the subjects, their skin complexion, the colors they're wearing, that can all change how much editing is actually required. But you don't hear them saying, well, I can't estimate what it's going to cost because I really don't know until I get into it. And that's what we do as lawyers, because that's what we've been taught, right? Coming straight out of law school, I don't know that that would actually be our comment to a client, but that's how we're trained up, and that's how the industry talks. We assume that we're special because there's so many different moving parts. And this is one where some of you, I can sense energetically the pushback, and we're not even in the same room at the moment. Just be curious and open about this. What if I'm right on this? How might that change the way you perceive your ability to do fixed fees? Okay, so let's just look at a few others. What about PR? Do you have you probably don't if you're a smaller firm, but PR, like if you've got a PR firm on retainer, you're not paying hourly. And again, that can be wildly different each month if there's some type of crisis that comes up, but the scope of services is going to maybe even exclude a crisis. What about SEO? When you hire someone to do SEO, or when you hire someone to do ads, these are all professional services. It's not a product. It's a professional service. It's the exact same thing that you're doing. And yet, when you get proposals, you don't get them in terms of an hourly rate. You get them in terms of a fixed fee. And they have so many different variables that go into play. But I'll tell you this, they don't then at the end of the project compare it to what would have happened if they had an hourly rate. And that then leads into how you go about figuring out whether you're pricing it right or wrong. But I see that we are basically out of time. I knew there was going to be so much to cover on this one. Okay, so at this moment, I am renaming the podcast. You're going to see it renamed. And it is going to be Fixed Fees Part 1. Fixed Fees Part 1. We will do Fixed Fees Part 2 in August. So that will take another full 30 minutes. But I hope this has at least got you started thinking about how you might be approaching fixed fees from the wrong way. And what I would love for you to do between now and next month is to just start paying attention to people that are offering you a service where you're just getting, here's the proposal, here's the cost, and here's the scope. Just start looking at that. Just start paying attention to it. That in and of itself is going to get you thinking about things differently. And I also encourage you to try on doing the benefits, the results, not from that, what's the financial value. Really broaden that question to start seeing, well, what's the true value that I could charge, and what do I think people would actually pay? So just play with that for this month, and then I'll be back with you in August, and we'll dig a little bit deeper. Okay, so this has been fun. I'm glad I finally decided to tackle this topic. Again, Business Development Masterclass. If you want to join me for that, it's absolutely free, but you do have to register. And we are going to do that on July 12th and July 17th. So you can pick the day and time that works best for you. All you have to do to register is go to heatherjoyhubbard.com/business development. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you soon. For show notes, downloads, and other free resources, and to keep the conversation going, head on over to hustleandflowpodcast.com. See you there.